Thank you very much, Anita. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. And that's from good morning to everyone wherever you're joining us from today. Welcome to the inaugural MESA USA National Conference on Designing for Equity. So the goal for the conference is to equip those of you responsible for delivering MESA programming to students with tools that help you talk about equity and make equity a central part of your designs this year. But before I share more about why this topic is important, we have a tradition that we must observe, and that is our roll call from each state. Since doing so virtually is a bit more challenging, we're going to recognize each state by hearing from each state's executive director. At this time, with all executive directors in attendance, please unmute yourselves if you don't have any background noise. And if you do, you can just unmute yourself when I get to your state. And if you could just introduce yourself and give a brief welcome when I call on you. So in alphabetical order, we'll go with Arizona.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rudy McCormick, and I serve as Executive Director for Arizona MESA. As Dwight and Anita have mentioned, we're really excited for this inaugural opportunity in an organization that has been focused on equity in providing STEM opportunities to our diverse group of students, to now put equity at the center of our students' design competitions. So welcome, thank you for your time this morning and throughout the day. We're really happy to have you here. Thank you.
California.
Good morning, everybody. This is Tom Ahn. I'm the Executive Director of California MESA. As you know, California is the birthplace of MESA, and we're excited to be a part of this large group of colleagues. I think in the last couple of years, we've really aligned well as a national consortium of states, and I think this event is a significant step in moving towards moving as one voice and really establishing ourselves as the largest STEM equity program in the United States. So welcome, and I hope you all have a good conference.
Colorado.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Cynthia Howell, and I'm the Executive Director for Colorado Rocky Mountain MESA. We had a MESA program for over 30 years in the past, went away for about 6 years. Well, we're back. And I'm proud to have about 7 of our members, advisors, mentors, and administrators on this at this conference today. We are thrilled to be a part of this and to be a part of MESA USA. And we're so, again, just delighted to be a part of this family. We look forward to our engagement. Thank you so much.
Mexico.
Good morning, everybody. We are incredibly honored to be a part of this collective, and we are so excited to be here today and to see all of you in attendance. This is going to be a great day. Thank you for taking your time to join us on a Saturday. And my name is Ling Faith Hewitts. I'm the Interim Director for New Mexico MESA. So welcome, everyone.
Oregon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tong Zhang. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon MESA. We're based at Portland State University. Want to echo Ling and others saying thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I also want to thank our keynote, KAMAL SINCLAIR, for being here and the great work that the NEDC committee has done to put this all together. So I'm really grateful that you are all here, and it's going to be an exciting day. Thank you so much.
Utah.
Good morning, everyone. This is Charlene Louie from Utah, the director here in the state of Utah for MESA Utah. I too, like everyone else, want to echo a welcome, and we're excited to be a part of this event. And just a shout out to everybody in Utah. I was just really excited to see several of our teachers across the state joining us, and other district folks as well. I also want to publicly thank those in Utah who have continued to work with MESA Utah as well, especially Dr. Paul Ross, who's part of the NEDC committee, similar to what Cynthia mentioned in Colorado. Utah, surprisingly, has been part of MESA for 30 plus years as well. But welcome, and this is going to be a great day, and thanks for being with us.
Last but not least, Washington.
Hello, on behalf of our Executive Director, Dr. Gregory King, my name is Sezi Fleming. I certainly want to mimic what many of the executive directors have said previously, and thank certainly the NEDC Planning Committee for such valuable, enriching work. We're so excited about this conference. Just looking at the schedule just makes one smile. So again, on behalf of Dr. King, just want to say thank you so much, and we're looking forward to today.
Thanks, everyone. So at this time, I'd like to welcome our esteemed guests from the Lemelson Foundation, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and the University of Rhode Island. Thank you so much for your interest and support of the MESA program. And to all of the teachers and program facilitators, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend the conference. We recognize that our weekends give us valuable relief from the work week, especially during the pandemic. So we sincerely appreciate your sacrifice and will be considerate of your time. During 2020, MESA celebrated its 50th year of operation. I just pause there, 50 years of STEM operation. So before STEM was STEM, it was MESA. We started our work in Oakland, California in 1970. With a handful of African-American boys with the goal of increasing the diversity of people of color and STEM professionals. Today, that work is just as relevant and important. In my letter to the MESA community during the summer, the image shown on this slide, I issued a challenge to our teachers and students to consider ways of addressing social injustice through their projects this year. This is a way to empower our students, regardless of racial background, to help solve the challenges that we face as a nation. So as I conclude my remarks and my welcome, I'd like to turn your attention to the backdrop of the slides in some of the presentations that you'll see today, and you'll also see in some of our social media announcements if you're subscribed to our accounts. Please advance the slide, Anita, thank you. While the artist is unknown, we chose this image to communicate our commitment to diversity in STEM because of its ability to communicate so much in a really simplistic way. Now, depending on your personal experience, the image may cause you to reflect on students in the classroom with their hands raised saying, oh, me, pick me. Or it may choose some to think about, hey, I have an answer. And to some, it also might communicate that I want to be counted. Well, all of these are valid interpretations. I'd like you to consider this one. I have something to contribute from my experience that may be beneficial to someone from any background. I'll repeat that. I have something to contribute from my experience that may be beneficial to someone from any background. At this time, Thomas Ahn, Vice Chair of MESA USA and Executive Director of California, will share more on MESA USA's mission and vision. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dwight. So I think the path that we're on right now really began a couple years ago when we convened as a group of directors in Arizona for our annual national conference. This was ironically the last time we were able to meet in person as an entire consortium. And there we sort of identified some challenges and some goals for us as a collective moving forward. I had only been an executive director in MESA for a couple of years at that point, and it was really an eye-opening experience getting to know my colleagues from all the different states, and realizing that this is a collaboration that had gone back many decades. MESA began in California 50 years ago. Maryland was the next state that they began 40 years ago, and some of our other stalwart states are at least 30, 35 years old. So it was an interesting time for me to join. It was a fortuitous time because it was also a time where we were really trying to think about what our vision and mission needed to be in our 50th year, how we needed to convey how we had evolved and how we were looking to impact the future. So as you can see on our screen, we went through a process that led us to a vision and mission statement that we hope will sort of fuel our work for the next 50 years, or at least the next couple of years anyway. The vision of MESA USA envisions a more equitable country where underrepresented students of color are empowered to achieve their dreams through mastery of STEM disciplines to create prosperity in our communities. And our mission is that as an alliance of states, MESA USA provides leadership and equity and access for STEM, achieves programmatic excellence, and ensures national program sustainability. So the mission really helps us define what our strategy needs to be moving forward. And if you look at the first part of that statement, providing leadership and equity and access for STEM, I think this conference is really a big piece of that. We've always been a program that seeks to empower and encourage underrepresented students. But I think one of the things that we came to understand was that in this time, we actually need to do more than just recruit and engage young people from underrepresented backgrounds. We actually need to double down on equity and really make that a focal point of how we operate as individual programs and also as a national alliance of states. So we're very excited. I'm very excited to be here in the kickoff. It's sort of interesting that we're doing this, you know, not in person, but you know, in through Zoom. I think you know, obviously this is something that we have to do, but Zoom affords us an interesting perspective on equity. Unlike in a live context, I think sometimes people in Zoom meetings who otherwise would not be speaking up feel more empowered to participate. So we hope that we are afforded the opportunity to get everyone to participate and learn from each other and from our esteemed speakers. So thank you very much for coming. And again, I hope you all have a great conference. Oh, maybe I'm supposed to throw this back to Anita.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom, for those words. Sorry. So let me go ahead and advance my screen here. First off, I want to introduce myself. My name is Anita Gonzalez, and I am the statewide program coordinator for New Mexico. And I am very honored and privileged to also be the current chair for our NEDC committee. And so what our NEDC committee, it's National Engineering Design Competition Committee, is we are a group of dedicated colleagues from across the different MESA USA states that come together to create the competitions, to provide resources, and to create our first ever inaugural MESA USA conference apart from our competition. So I am very thankful and honored to be part of this group. Many of my colleagues, I've had the privilege to work with them for many years now. And so we are excited for this conference and for the different resources that we have for you today. So we're doing our introduction a little bit different in our regular meetings. This is our Zoom, this is our group photo as best as we can get from across the country. So I do want to take a minute to introduce our different NEDC members. From Washington, we have Elizabeth Stevens, or Liz Stevens, California, Beatrice Prieto, Oregon, Tamara Depew, Utah, Dr. Paul Ross, New Mexico is myself. Arizona, we have two members, Manny Leon and Bill Pike. And from Maryland, we have Jason Cartwright. So everybody, if they're on the screen, if they want to give a wave. But these individuals will be leading the different workshops throughout the day today. They have been working with their state advisors, their state staff to, ensure a quality conference. So definitely thank you all for all your support, and we will be here for your help throughout the day. So the next thing I'm going to go over are just some housekeeping for the day, letting you know how the conference is going to go and some community guidelines. First, you guys should have all received a document. It is a PDF document that lists the agenda as well as all of the session descriptions, and it includes all the Zoom links for all the sessions. We try to mimic this as best as possible with the real conference, where you have your opening and then you are dismissed, and then you pick your session that you would like to go to. So how you enter the door of a Zoom session is all the links are there available in the session descriptions. So you would just click on the link. Keep in mind that all of our sessions are hosted by different state Zoom accounts. So the requirements are different for some of them. So some may have passwords, some may not, but they are all listed in that sheet. So whatever you need for access is available to you there. Just pick and choose. If for any reason you do have any questions about the conference or you need a landing place, one of our rooms, it's room 5, is titled School Share Out. And it's also our help desk. So in that room, there will always be a couple of NEDC members staffing that room. So pop on in there and ask any questions that you may have throughout the conference in that session. Some things to note are, once you are in the session, all of our sessions are going to be recorded so we can share this with the rest of our MESA USA collective, and we can just have for use as needed. So as an option, we would love to see your smiling faces, but we do understand that cameras are optional. So you pick your choice. Also throughout the different sessions, as normal Zoom protocol, if you can just keep your microphones muted when they're not in use, but as appropriate, if you do have a question, please feel free to turn them on. Also to use the chat functionality throughout the session as needed. The other general thing is how we are tracking attendance for this conference. So this is pretty important. So at the end of every session, so now at the end of our opening, at the end of session 1, and at the end of session 2, you're going to be asked to complete an attendance survey. So that is very important. So it will be popped up in the chat. It is just a link that will take you to SurveyMonkey. So it'll pop up just on an external web browser. And if you can just take a few minutes to complete it, make sure and hit submit. That'll help us track for our different state information, also for our national information, who's here at the conference, and also just to get a little feedback from all of you on our different sessions. Also, just some other general community guidelines for our session. We're very happy to have you here. We understand that this is a challenging space, so we're taking advantage of it as best as we can, and we're just adapting, and we are very proud to be offering a virtual conference to many of you across the country. This is a time for different perspectives and discussion, so please take advantage. When you're here in this conference, we just ask that you be open to new ideas, that you are participatory. Please ask questions, because that's what it's here for. This is the first time many of you may be able to network with some of our other MESA USA advisors from across the state. So take advantage of that. This also may be the first time that you're able to hear workshops or presentations from colleagues from across the state. So please take advantage of that. We're very excited to bring that perspective and that part of this conference to you all. We also understand that this Zoom world also brings in additional possible distractions, and that's okay. So if you have a coworker that pops in on a Saturday, have them give a wave on the camera. The MESA USA family is large and welcoming. So, we understand that life happens, and we are just very thankful and grateful for you to be here today with us, especially on a Saturday. And just again, be respectful of everyone's space and different levels of experience. We have teachers from across the country that are coming with different backgrounds, different experience levels, just different perspectives. And that is the beauty of this conference, is that we all get to come together to share and just take advantage of this learning opportunity. So with that, that is all the housekeeping announcements that I have for you. And I will go ahead and pass on. Let me go ahead and change this out. Now to Mr. Rudy McCormick from Arizona.
Thank you very much, Anita. And again, thank you for the work that you've put into preparing this wonderful conference, and to the work that's been done by the NEDC. Again, I had a chance just a second ago to look and see how many participants, and we're over 100, and that's awesome. expecting even more throughout the day. So great work to everybody. It's my pleasure and distinct honor to introduce David Coronado, who is a program officer for the Lemelson Foundation. And David also has a rich history with MESA, in particular in Oregon. And so he will be introducing our keynote in just a second. But to say a little bit about David, David Coronado joined the Lemelson Foundation as a program officer in 2015. And he works to support student growth by promoting equal access to invention education, STEM coursework, and out-of-school learning in K-12 schools. David is passionate about breaking the cycle of poverty that prevents many young people from succeeding and providing alternative pathways that involve inspiration, education, and graduation. Things that we're all, as educators, very much behind. Before joining Lemelson, David spent over a decade as executive director of Oregon MESA at Portland State University. Portland State University actually is currently a Lemelson Foundation grantee. He managed all aspects of Oregon MESA's work to help students from underserved communities gain access to STEM and invention education. I remember one of my very first opportunities to participate in the National Engineering Design Competition was when David was hosting. Lemelson was also a sponsor that year, if I'm not mistaken. And it was just a wonderful conference and really kind of, I think, set a bar for us in Arizona who wouldn't host until last year. But whether he knows it or not, he set a high bar. Not only did he serve Oregon MESA, but nationally he served as the president of MESA USA as well, and has worked to bring invention education as an approach that has now been integrated across the MESA program nationally and will continue to be integrated throughout these next few years. David has served as an academic coordinator at Harvey Mudd College Math and Science Center and as president of the Oregon College Access Network. David also is very proud to have earned his Bachelor of Arts from Occidental College. With all that being said, I'd like to introduce to you a very good friend to MESA, Mr. David Coronado.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see some old faces, some new faces. I think I even have more gray hair after all these years. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for MESA for inviting me to introduce your keynote speaker today. Yeah, so having spent many years in MESA, it's great to see some of my Oregon friends. There's Tamara, who helped raise the bar on the national competition, and Tong, who literally lives like a mile from me, right, Tong? But I also, one of the things that you don't know about me is I was a MESA student. I was a middle school and high school student back in California. So congratulations, California. There are thousands of us alumni who are across the country. And whether we go into STEM or not, we are leaders in what we are doing in our communities, in our fields. So, you know, I just want to thank you all for being online on a Saturday, no less, even in your fuzzy slippers. I'm sure you won't admit that, but it's great to see everyone. I just want to thank you all for the work that you're doing to really help support and nurture our most precious resource of the 21st century, and that is our young people. And what better time to talk and to have KAMAL Sinclair talk about designing equity, justice, and beauty. I mean, if anything, COVID and the Black Lives Matter has really shown us that we're really far from having justice or equity in our society. I mean, some of us here, we live and we see that injustice every day in our regular lives. And so while what I see nationally is people are embracing this equity, the hard work is doing the equity work, diving in deep and really thinking around what is it that we're doing that may actually be perpetuating inequity, even though in our hearts, we're trying not to do that. So I appreciate everyone spending your time really diving deep on this subject, because I know it's near and dear to my heart. My mission in life, I said, if you ever looked at my LinkedIn profile, it's nothing about my job, it's about my mission in life. And that's to make sure that every young person has agency in their life to choose their destination and really have the impact in the world we hope they will. And I know you all agree on that as well. So last year I had an opportunity I learned about Kamal Sinclair as we were thinking about invention. So I work a lot at the Lemelson Foundation around invention and innovation. Our foundation is really focused on improving lives through invention. And that's just looking at, we got innovations and inventions can solve some of our most pressing problems, but we look at the pipeline and we're not seeing where Black, Brown, Native, Indigenous people, women are not being invited to the table. What does that mean for our economy? What does that mean for our lives when we're starting to look at these technologies? And we're seeing that even now where people across the country, especially in Midwest rural communities, are being left out of this economy. So we think about, what does that mean? So we invited Kamal Sinclair, who works at the intersection of racial justice and innovation. And so one of the things we were talking, I left with that convening, which is this particular note, Kamal, which is, without diversity and innovation can perpetuate injustice for those who are diverse. And you think about it, we all get excited about innovation. Last night, our internet went out and I couldn't even turn on my lights. It was wonderful. But to think about how innovation, where we're being left out as people of color from innovation, what are we losing and leaving on the table for solutions for the world? And for those technologies that are being developed without diversity, what does that mean? How can those technologies perpetuate racial injustice? It was a deep topic we didn't even think about. And so I'm excited to really introduce Kamal Sinclair. She wowed us and she wowed some of your leaders. And so they reached out to her to bring her to your conversation today. But without further ado, I want to introduce Kamal Sinclair so she can really dive deeply into this subject. Kamal is the executive director of the Guild of Future Architects. She's co-author of Making a New Reality and artist at Sinclair Futures. She also served as the external advisor to the Ford family, or the Ford Foundation's Just Films and MacArthur Foundation's Journalism and Media program, creative advisor to For Freedoms, MIT Center for Advanced Virtuality, Starfish Accelerator, and IBEAM. She's very busy. Previously, she was the director of Sundance Institute New Frontier Labs program and artist producer on Question Bridges, Blackmail. Everyone, please, I hope you'll give her a warm welcome and to Kamal Sinclair.
Thank you so much, David. I have to say, being at Invent Ed a year ago, it's just been phenomenal to have been welcomed into the community. I have to say that I'm deeply honored by the invitation to even speak with you all, because I'm really humbled by this history, this deep history of 50 years of equity, with working towards equity and inclusion and belonging within STEM, to make sure that every voice is contributing to the design of our future through STEM education. And I'm also personally thankful for the ecosystem that you guys have been developing, because my son is a STEM, he's a he's a teenager who is, charting a path into his future to become a theoretical physicist. And that passion, is just all encompassing of his conversations, his creativity. He's got a blog going talking about, all the things that he hopes to see come into fruition in his lifetime. So, the work that you do as educators to help the potential that's latent in students like my son, I just could not be more thankful for your incredible efforts. And already I have a strong, just meeting you guys just on the Zoom in the first half hour, I feel a strong sense of belonging, which I think is one of the key and critical parts of this inclusion, equity, and equality work is that sense of belonging. So I appreciate that. Here, I'm going to share my screen, and just to give you guys a little heads up, this is one of my, I'm known for kind of presenting in a montage. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of information with you about my journey at these different intersections between art, science, technology, and innovation. And it's all in a website called makinganewreality.org. So you know, if you feel overwhelmed, you're like, I missed something, it'll be there, and I'll have that link at the end of the slides. But just wanted to let you know that you can get ready for a lot coming your way. I also wanted to share that the Making New Reality work that originally started out as a commission of a report for the Ford Foundation is now, as of this year, published as a book. It's designed to be a toolkit for educators in, you know, from 9 through 12, all the way into university, to consider ways of designing for an inclusive media future. I also wanted to just give a little bit of background about how this emerged. It came from a intersection that I'll get to this in a moment, but this, I've had an incredible 10 years of working with artists, technologists, scientists, and innovation entrepreneurs. And we've worked, when I was at the Sundance Institute, with thousands of people and working to find those bridges between those different fields of knowledge and fields of curiosity, which has allowed me to have a really privileged point of perspective on how these ideas can be coordinated to create a more just and beautiful future. Before I get into it, I wanted to first do a land acknowledgement of where I live in Los Angeles. This is the traditional lands of the Tongva, Tatavayam, and Chumash peoples. And if you would like to put in the chat, you know, the traditional lands that you're on, who are the ancestral stewards, who are the current stewards of that land, and respecting that tradition, and also being aware of the complicated history around the fact that we are in place on lands that have been stewarded for thousands of years by communities of indigenous peoples. So just wanted to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to share that in the chat. I'm having a bit of an issue with my slide advancement. I also want to acknowledge those that have got this research to this point: Ford Foundation, the Sundance Institute, Immerse.news, and the Guild of Future Architects. And let's dive in. So we know, I had an opportunity to go to the World Economic Forum in 2017, and this idea of the fourth industrial revolution was quite ripe in the dialogue at that time. I'm sure you guys have heard about this, been engaged in dialogue about it, have critiqued it in many ways. But essentially, it's one way of trying to conceptualize or give language to the fact that we are at the beginning of a new epoch in human capacity and human capability. Some people call it the fourth industrial revolution. And the way that that's been defined is that it's fueled by bioengineering, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, or kind of omnipresent connectivity, and immersive technology. And we are encountering technological and scientific breakthroughs that are essentially disrupting our sense of reality. We are living in the most dynamic, complex, expansive, and abundant state of technological and communication architecture in human history, with mind-blowing scientific discoveries daily. And our inventions are being integrated into every object and physical structure. They're becoming independently intelligent. They're blending with our bodies, and even changing the fundamental nature of our biologies. And this is happening at a time when we are facing major disruptions in environmental, political, economic, and social systems. So how do we navigate all of this to define an equitable future? I just wanted to kind of just stop on a quote from the CEO of Microsoft that was at that 2017 World Economic Forum event that I got a chance to attend. And he's asking, is the surplus that is going to be created because of breakthroughs in artificial intelligence only going to the few, or is it going to be more inclusive growth? I mean, I would like you to just take a moment to really think about the implications of just this one area of STEM innovation and what that means on our future. We have a very small group of people that are managing, global scale data for informing deep learning machines. And we already are seeing with films like Coded Bias or Social Dilemma, what happens when we are not thinking about that from a broad perspective, not just in terms of kind of the returns on investment from a capitalistic perspective, but really looking at what are the social implications of our innovations on our sociology, psychology, and prosperity, and shared prosperity potentially. And so I invite you to think about the word imagination as a starting place for answering that question of how do we navigate this. Each person that is here with us today is actively engaged in imagining our future. We are supporting innovators and inventors and future entrepreneurs who will imagine new tools and products, systems and technologies to increase human power and ability at its most tender stage, and that is our children and our students. Just on a side note, I've been in conversation, I was helping to design a Future of Culture initiative with Stanford University because they're working on an initiative after doing a major survey of their student alumni and student body over many years. They realized that they had not prepared their students to become the leaders of the technological revolutions that they were leading because they didn't have a full scope of these kinds of principles around the equity and inclusion that you guys are so committed to here as a community. And I think that that's really important because part of what, we understand imagination is a precursor to innovation and then the precursor to what becomes reality and is manifested. I'm someone who comes from the arts and media, and I came from that lens into the technological space. And I've seen with my own eyes the power of that imagination at that intersection. This is a Minority Report, which you guys may remember from a couple of decades ago. Alex McDowell is one of the artists that I work with. He's a member of the Guild of Future Architects, and he was the art director on this film. And because there was no script, when he got hired, he had to start to build out the world of this fictional environment from scratch. And so he brought together people from various different backgrounds, science, technology, transportation, and urban planning, health, and public health, trying to understand what that future cityscape might look like from a perspective of from all of these different lenses that contribute to complex human systems like a city. And over a period of doing this co-created world building of this fictional story, they created this film. And in the film, at the time, there was kind of mind-blowing ideas around what this technology could be. And out of that creative process came 100 patents over since the film came out. And so that was really inspiring to him to think about the power of collective imagination in bringing a technology to life. And later we'll talk about, and this is one of the technologies that came out, was early gestural interfaces that have now kind of continued to evolve and go from imagination to functionality, and then back into imagination in the ways in which we are able to use gestural interfaces for telling our stories and creating poetry. So wanted to just go through really quickly a survey of some of the ways in which I've seen that intersection between imagination and actually kind of the invention space in the work that I've done at Sundance. This is a piece that we showed where a scientist from Sweden was looking at multiple personalities disorder, and wanted to find a way to help integrate, kind of help people to navigate the disruptions and the anxiety and stress of having to manage this disorder. And so he thought of, how do I take people out of a pedestrian experience of their body and put them into an alternate experience of their body? And he created this virtual reality, hyper reality experience where they got a chance to fly as a bird over cities around the world. And with complete agility. And it was something that actually lowered stress levels in patients. So this idea of a beautiful aesthetic experience connected with a technological experience, having medical outcomes that were positive. We've seen, the beauty of data science connected with artistry of data visualization and the storytelling This is a piece that scrubbed 665 million scrubs of human emotional data and was able to construct a story of what our emotional states are over the different life phases from teenagers to elderly. We've seen ambient data. This is a piece that was constructed in a lab in Brooklyn, which is a community STEM lab where focused on Afrofuturism, and the community designed this lantern that you can walk around New York City, and everywhere you cross a place where a Black person was killed by a police officer, it lights up. So connecting to the ambient data and telling a story of place and connecting people to the social environments with which that technology allows them to connect with. You understand smart homes and the implications of that in terms of surveillance, as well as in terms of, kind of in-home functionality. We've got, this is a project we had at Sundance in January where it created an augmented reality experience of your own breath and how it contributes to how your breath brings carbon to a tree and how that tree then brings oxygen to you. But they've tracked your breathing data while you were there at Sundance. And then a week later, they send you a data visualization of how your breath starts to integrate at different scales until a week later, your breath is implicated in our global system of how our air circulatory systems work. We've seen the ways in which these kind of immersive technology have gone into the National Theatre in the UK, where they're creating highly personalized experiences where this one actor to one audience member is giving someone a sense of what it's like to be with a mother as she battles cancer. Algorithmic co-creation with algorithms is another area of inquiry where the artwork is never made by the artist alone. It's always made in collaboration with a smart system. We're also seeing how artists and technologists are playing with the idea of the future of work. This is a piece that we developed at the USC World Building Institute, where an artist decided to be the intermediary between a smart home system and the algorithmic system, where she tried to kind of what is the future of work when AI can do so much of the nitty gritty things of ordering things, turning on your lights and the like. What does it mean when a human interface is creating the emotional leap between what the AI system is providing in services and what the human connection is needed in terms of a human experience. She also played with the idea of how the endurance of a human body next to an artificial intelligence system. She programmed a smart system to help her run a cocktail party and basically invited people based on their social media data. The AI had to invite the perfect 8 people to come to a cocktail party. Every hour, different 8 would walk in the door for 24 hours. And she had an earpiece in her ear, and the AI, based on the conversation it was hearing, would tell her what to do, what to say, what drinks to pour. And over 24 hours, she was playing with where does the line need to be drawn in the future of work between what the AI can do and what a human needs to do? Can an AI actually curate a social experience at the level that a human could, or maybe better? We've seen, this is a smart system that allows you to be in conversation with Holocaust survivors for as they pass, you can still have a conversational experience. This is an augmented reality hologram, and they've interviewed over 1,000 questions. All those have gone into a database, and with natural language processing, the computer can bring up the right response to your questions. And I've spoken with this gentleman in an augmented reality form, and he's quite good at holding a good conversation and telling us his story. So what is the future of memoir? What is the future of family dynamics over time? This is a blockchain project where Amelia Winger-Bearskin, who's an Indigenous woman, wants to make sure that the stories of our history are never appropriated for the victor's history again, and that there is a utility in using technologies like blockchain to try to protect a multi-lensed version of our history going forward, so things cannot be buried. I'm not going to go into much more detail, but we have, smart machines. This is, one of the robots that has citizenship, that is enrolled in universities, that is deeply trying to understand what it means to be Black and female from this lens of a learning machine. Did the same thing with Chomsky with an MIT project last year, where they had the real Chomsky kind of engage with his AI personality that was based on just millions of data points of his work and his digital presence over his entire career, to see who was more Chomsky, the real Chomsky or this AI version of Chomsky. This is an artist that sent her her DNA up into space through Blue Origin rocket, and was kind of questioning kind of the cosmology that an organization like Blue Origin is thinking about in space versus a feminine and Chinese cosmology. I'm going to go a little bit faster here, but the way in which wearable technologies are being included, the way in which technologies that are in kind of can read brain activity, the way that artists are actually and people are actually becoming more cybergony and implanting technologies into their body, and the ways in which medical and healthcare are. This is something we showed where a medical facility was research center was connecting a technology that can read your brain activity, virtual reality, and exoskeletons to working with paraplegics, and they could think, move my legs, see their legs move, and then the exoskeleton move their legs. And after 6 months, they could hold their bowels and move their toes. So this technology is that powerful to even overcome some of these aspects of our broken biological systems. And last but not least, just thinking about the power of DNA, the way in which we're understanding this as code in ways that we can now encode our data onto DNA. This is a film that we showed at Sundance in January that was stored on the filmmaker's own DNA molecules and is being preserved on her own DNA molecules, and was extracted from her DNA molecules to then be shown on a screen. So what are the implications of that? At first, we just thought it was deep storage, but then Caltech was able to actually create an artificial intelligence on DNA that allowed them, the DNA to read, the smart system to read handwritten letters. So these have huge implications. I'm trying to just give you a sense of what as you guys know, the depth of the rabbit hole of these kinds of scientific breakthroughs, and what our young people are going to have to navigate in terms of the ethics around how do we wield the power of these technologies and scientific capabilities going forward. And so let's talk about power. Our imagination literally makes our reality, as I talked about in the imagination section, and that is power. So active imaginations of the future is how humans guide the actions of the present and make our futures real. And as innovators and Imagineers, with the means of creation and distribution, each person at this event also has the power to impact that trajectory of our future. With educating our young people, we have the power to help them define how they're going to wield this power. And one example of that with an artist who was working in bioengineering, really wanted to expose a little bit about what that power looks like and how we need to understand our power over it. Her name is Heather Dewey Hagborg. She went around New York City and just collected random things off the ground, out of the subway stations, out of public restrooms, that had remnants of people's DNA, cigarette butts, gum, hair, fingernails. And she not only was able to do analysis on that allowed her to understand what their ancestry was, but she also understood what their health conditions were. But then she also was able to use the FBI DNA profiling system to 3D print an approximation of their faces. And so she's asking this question around the power of this technology to pull something off of someone's glass that they drink on at a restaurant, and being able to surveil them in this way through what they've left behind and what we shed every day. This is the kind of thing that we have to have a conversation about on a deeper level, and not just in the hands of the few. She also was able to purchase a vial of saliva from a company that sells medical cadavers and human biological things in order for them to, and she was able to break the privacy code that that person that gave their saliva was promised. And she not only found that person's Facebook page, she pretended to be them on 23andMe, and she also was able to go to their home. So this is all, and then she was also able to grow a clone of their tissues. So, you know, this is what our children are going to have to navigate as STEM leaders in the future. How do we navigate that level of transparency and vulnerability and also opportunity? So let's talk about that responsibility a little bit. Some of our past innovation cycles set us on a trajectory that has had and is having catastrophic environmental, cultural, social, economic, and political consequences. Much of these pitfalls could have been avoided if we had not excluded people who had the visibility in their value systems, in their experience, in their cosmologies to actually mitigate those issues. And I think, you know, now is the time to engineer that robust participation of people from a broad set of perspectives to imagine the future, so we can illustrate their ideas, share them broadly, collectively prototype them, and involve them through that collaborative process, because we can't risk having a small fraction of the global community define the values and features of our future systems. As you can see from the technologies and the ways that I just shared, the stakes are just too high for that. This is a quote from a former official at the mayor's office in New York City that I interviewed, and basically said the progress of racial justice, and I think this goes for all justice, and the development of technologies are not linear. Every time you develop a new technology, you have to have a thought process about the history and the system of oppression that the technology is being created and released into. Think about ways to bend the technology to justice and not allow it to replicate, entrench, and worsen injustice. And I think fundamentally that's the call to action to this community, has been for 50 years, and is critical for the students that are going to be having to navigate this new world. I got an opportunity in 2012, I was at Sundance, and the very first prototype of the Oculus Rift was brought to Sundance. It was a piece called Hunger in Los Angeles, where it was a journalism piece talking about the running out of food in the food banks of LA, and how this actually happened, where a man went into a diabetic coma on the street waiting outside of a food bank hoping to get food. And so the journalist was working at USC, was working with their virtual reality technology, and made this piece, but we couldn't bring it to Sundance because it was too expensive. It was too, the USC wouldn't let her take it off the campus to go up to a snowy mountain up in Park City, Utah. So one of her students, Palmer Luckey, said, hey, why don't we try it with this smartphone and encase the smartphone into this kind of contraption and strap it to heads, right? So this piece came, it had a 13-hour wait. People were waiting to get in to see this piece. And as you may or may not know, that student, Palmer Luckey, ended up getting support from other kind of older men to help him establish a Kickstarter, made $2 million on that to further the prototype, and then sold it to Facebook for $2 billion. Before he was 25, he was worth $700 million. And I was in the room when this happened, and I got an opportunity to stay very close to the process. And 2 years after, in 2014, I'm at the very first developers conference for the Oculus Rift. Out of 150,000 people that had the developers kit, only 1,000 were invited to be at this first developers conference. And when I walked into the ballroom of the Lowe Hotel in Hollywood, I was just struck. And I've been in a lot of places where I'm maybe, one of few with my identity tags being, Black woman, single mother, all of these things. And I literally felt like I walked into a wall of men, and predominantly white men. And it was striking. And I wanted to leave and go to a Starbucks until my panel, but I didn't. I forced myself to stay in the room. I started introducing myself. And honestly, it was like Steve Jobs was about to come on. It was just people were just so excited about the possibilities of this new innovative path. I mean, VR is not new, but this particular kind of cycle of growth and development and marketability. And it was fine. I took a picture of the girls' bathroom. It was empty. The guy's bathroom had a line around the corner, which I'd never seen before. And at the plenary session, which this is a picture of, there were 1,000 people in the audience, and this is the end of the 3 days. And a woman stood up. I counted about 30 women the whole time I was there. A woman stood up and said, "Hey, what are we going to do about the apparent gender gap here?" And from the stage, each person on the stage, some that I know and are very kind to me, basically said, "This is a meritocracy. This 1,000 people here represents the best of the best. We need to get a return on investment for this $2 billion. We don't have time to play gender politics." And it was like a sucker punch in the gut to the field of women that were working in the space. And it was very counter to what we were seeing in the DIY environment, that just a few months later, we held the first major virtual reality storytelling exhibition in any festival environment. It was 68% women, queer, and people of color. And it was a turning point for the industry. I personally walked venture capitalists. I took heads of film institutions, of gaming institutions, of technology companies through this just touring them from 7 in the morning till 7 at night for 10 days straight. And I saw people like Rose Trochet, who is a queer Puerto Rican woman, her work be the thing that actually shifted the industry being willing to invest in this technology, that her work actually stimulated a belief that something heightened could happen with it. But out of that exhibition, only men were funded at $1 million to $20 million of investment walking out of there. And 3 years later, Rose Trochet she was still self-funding out of her own pocket at $15,000 for a project. And she was in competition now with men that had 2 years of millions of dollars and staff to experiment with refining the technology, and she just couldn't compete. So this is where there was no pipeline issue, within 2 years, a pipeline issue becomes apparent. And so I went from there to, we had an MIT social computing residency where we put artists in social computing group. And Sepp Kamvar, who is the lead, he shared with me that code is the new superpower. Code defines a social process, and that social process defines our world. And when I looked at this, as you all know, the statistics around STEM, I got very concerned about who was in wielding that superpower and was then creating that social process. He talked about Twitter and food trucks and Airbnb and share rides, and how all of that was changing our behavior, even our real estate, even green spaces in our communities. Then I went to Google and I met with Robert Wong at the Google Creative Lab. And he said that he feared that because we were not creating an inclusive environment in these big tech companies, that we would not be able to achieve a human-centered future, and that was very dangerous. And he was working hard to try to create more inclusivity, not just from the demographics of race and gender and orientation, but also from the idea of bringing different fields of knowledge into the room to consider how these technologies implicate our culture and our family lives and our systems. And then I went to Oxford for the Skoll World Forum. And there I met the head of a major technology company's futures department, where they build out whole apartments and whole office spaces in pipeline technology. This is one of the big 4 technology companies. And he showed me a video of the future, and he was very earnest and excited to share this vision of the future. And me and my colleagues looked at it and we said, wow, this is really exciting from a kind of technological, it was very whiz bang, it was very shiny object in terms of the technology. But we said, it's very homogenous and it's pretty soulless. And I said, do you have anybody from, different backgrounds and, the arts and humanities and all that? And he said, we're 30 engineers and we've never brought anybody else into the space. And he goes, wow, that's a blind spot. And I thought about when I was in grad school, we had to study the Columbia Space Shuttle. I got a master's in business and an undergrad in the arts. And one of the major issues when NASA went back and had to understand why this tragedy happened, when they went and looked at it, it was a cultural issue within NASA that they ultimately decided led to the missing of this small piece that could have prevented this tragedy. And that was that they had a cultural organization that did not allow diversity of thought. It did not allow marginal thinking to penetrate the center, and it was too hierarchical in its structure. And I think that this is really the metaphor of what I was seeing personally being in these halls of power at this intersection of technology, innovation, and culture, and thinking, how do we not allow that kind of cultural structure to design around these exponential technologies like artificial intelligence and bioengineering? And then I go back and I look at previous industrial revolutions, and I think, who was not at the table helping to penetrate the thinking of how we wield that power at that time? And I got to be at a panel with Al Gore and an activist named Heather Ray, who's an indigenous rights activist. And she said, it's been a 400-year run of genocide and slavery that built the foundation for industrialization moving through all the natural resources. And we just got the bill, which is climate change. And so I think about, well, that was what the bill was from that, from that legacy of the last, 100, 200 years of industrialization. What is going to be the bill for this fourth industrial revolution? So I'm just, in the research, I spoke to over 130 people. I researched 1,000 articles trying to understand what are the key issues, and just quickly, biased narratives, biased algorithms, and a false sense of democratization in our kind of social media sphere. We also know about, the bias of code, and that's becoming more and more apparent every day with further research. Diversity, stigma, security and privacy regulations with new technologies, infringements on rights and freedoms, lack of safe spaces when diverse peoples do come into environments of STEM. This is a panel on Twitch and some of the stuff that's been happening in that space. And then, of course, participation and representation gaps. In 2018, Slate magazine amplified one of the largest studies on diversity in Silicon Valley. And you can see not only is it Black and Latino populations are majorly underrepresented, which was not news, but also, in terms of gender, we see even less opportunity for engagement and acceleration in career. But also, what was really powerful was the bamboo ceiling for Asian men became even more apparent from this accessing more data than had ever been accessed before in terms of those diversities. So one thing I want to talk about in terms of that is the power of our stories and narratives and how we define our identities around STEM. There was a report done by NPR a few years ago that said what happened to women in tech and women in code. And this was that they looked at women in medicine, law, and physical sciences. And since kind of the feminist revolution in the 60s and 70s, there had been a steady uptick. But women in technology and computer science dropped kind of off a cliff in 83 and 84. And when they went back to look at why did women drop out of tech in 83, 84, they found that it was they interviewed people that had left their jobs in tech companies or left computer science programs, and it all came down to the stories that were being told about who the geek identity was. The big tech companies decided to target, from a marketing perspective, white boys at Radio Shacks. And so because they were sending a lot of marketing that way, it started to create a narrative. And that was, for whatever reason, they decided to target that group, whether it was they had time on their hands and money in their hands, or that they had their own biases, that started to penetrate our culture. You saw films that were replicating that, weird science, war games, Revenge of the Nerds, again, centering males as this new geek culture emerged. And the women, not only did the women start having inferiority complexes and saying, oh, I didn't think I was smart enough. Oh, I didn't think I can compete, even though they were very competitive in terms of, if you looked at their grades comparatively. But the men started to, their superiority complex got triggered. And then the toxic masculinity came in, the hazing, and you started to see some of the things you've seen with Gamergate and those kinds of things. So So that narrative is so critical. It triggers our inferiority and our superiority complexes in ways that we've lost. How much did we lose in value from women being out of computer science since the early 80s? What might have we avoided if they had stayed in and contributed a perspective that they have to contribute? Also, the one other thing about this report is it basically debunked the pipeline issue of meritocracy. They actually showed that outside of Silicon Valley, there was a lot more diversity and capability and hiring people that have the skills and capabilities to be in tech. So again, this mythology of meritocracy is something that we really have to question and why we buy into it. I won't patronizing attitudes. There were silos in terms of, I won't go into all the details of all this stuff, but ultimately I interviewed the head, Julianne Cromit, who was the head of diversity for Google and now is leading diversity at Walt Disney. And she said that we have an inability to imagine our futures. She talked about how 30 years ago, there was there was somewhat of a shared idea about what that future could be. There was a narrative about it, but that in her estimation, now there's just a retraction, a fear-based narrative of what the future is. And that's leading to the divisions in our society and leading to anger and leading to frustration about a lack of agency in imagining our future. And that's where these students, that's one of the critical pedagogical things that I think are critical for STEM education, is that our students understand that they not only that they have agency in defining what that future is, and they don't just have to have it prescribed to them by the powers that currently be. So I was feeling very depressed about all this. I was at Oxford. I was walking through these cobblestone streets with a colleague of mine, and I was just like, oh my God, it's just so much to overcome to have a more inclusive future at this intersection. And she said, Kamal, it hasn't happened yet. With these particular new breakthroughs and innovations, she said, there is an opportunity to intervene. And it just felt like, oh, there's an opportunity here. Not only do we have a small window to avoid the worst version of our future, but we also have an incredible opportunity to set a trajectory for a beautiful version of our future. The disruptions of climate change, overpopulation, surplus technologies that require these bold and immediate actions, we have an opportunity. How might we seize that opportunity to harness exponential technologies to bring global prosperity and environmental harmony? How might we design a future that abolishes scarcity-based systems thinking that lead to oppressive systems, to one that understands that if you unlock the full scope of human potential, you actually create abundance and shared prosperity? And so I thought about Jane Jacobs, who was an activist at this major innovation phase in New York City, where Robert Moses and others like him were kind of, from a top-down perspective, trying to design the future of New York from these lens of progress and innovation. But they were doing things that were, in her opinion, taking away for efficiency and economic, expediency. Their value systems were contrasting with her value systems around things like a green space, like Washington Square Park, or not kind of ghettoizing poor people on the edges in these projects of Manhattan. But she fought, and I went to New York University, and this was one of those places of kind of a place that I was able to have a regeneration in the midst of all the stuff that was going on in New York City. And I think, if she was able to push back against that level of power to preserve certain value systems and innovation, we can do the same. And there's an opportunity, but that opportunity must be in that we democratize the imagination of our future. We need interventions in terms of mitigating bias, things like universal design principles, that if you design for the margins first, you design better for everyone. Things about mitigating our bias. How do we make bias blind? There was a blind, we know in the symphony system, they tried these blind auditions and actually increased diversity greatly. Well, I was reading in some of the articles I looked at that there was a double-blind coding test before people would get into technology positions, and that it changed the breakdown of men to women, where women were 58%, were hired at 58% when their gender was not known, when they were being considered for these jobs. So things like, how do we intervene in group think? I got a chance to go to Bell Labs and spend time with the EAT program there, which is really working to integrate not only, it's a program that Rauschenberg and other artists had participated with, Nobel-winning scientists back in a half century ago, and now they have reestablished it and are again creating these intersections between fields of knowledge in robust ways. We also have how do we intervene at systems level and infrastructure level? And just this will be the last thing I talk about. There's institutional change where you're kind of changing culture to become more inclusive, which I've seen great strides in many ways with inside of Disney, inside of Sundance and the like. But there's also systematic change. Things like the Data Nutrition Project that is helping to make visible how our data is being used in these smart systems. I think about public television as a system. When it started, they had ambitions to create a robust public space for the voices of democracy. And then it really did never reach what they had originally imagined in the middle of last century. And when I got hired for Ford, they asked, how do we not be 25 years behind in emerging technology like we were with television? Because they were at the part of that establishing public TV in this country. And we talked about Web 1.0, where we're still, even though the UN has made access to data and broadband and the internet a human right, we still are fighting for that. We talked about the current challenges with big companies like Google and Facebook, and what are those ethical and what are their responsibilities beyond the marketplace with the power that they wield over our social systems and our environmental systems. But we already maybe 10 to 15 years behind on what are those equitable and inclusive and just interventions within things like smart cities, within the omnipresent internet, the IoT world. And then if you look at like Web 4.0, as some people describe it, when there's so much data, there's so much to manage in terms of the terabytes and terabytes of data that we are navigating as individual human beings, when we need to have a personalized AI that is helping us to navigate the complexity of our systems. Are we intervening? Are we already too late to establish the right kind of justice and equity in that system? So I am out of time, but one thought exercise that I hope that you can do with your students is to expose them to some of these things and ask them, okay, what is one concern in terms of some pipeline technology or scientific capacities that have been opened through scientific breakthroughs, and ask them, what is one issue that you can see in terms of equity, and have them imagine it, and then say, okay, well, what's one intervention? And give them the sense of power and agency to intervene and to create an intervention, not just wait for somebody else to do it. And then once they think of an intervention, have them say, okay, now what might go wrong with that? What kind of blind spot am I having, or perceptual limitation am I having in that intervention? And then think again, well, how do you mitigate that? And just continue to help them understand the critical thinking exercise of finding our own perceptual limitations so that we can be as thoughtful and intentional as possible to wield the power that they're going to be wielding in their careers and in their, whether they go into STEM or not, they're going to be impacted and have some level of agency around these things. And then continue that process. And ultimately, one question to ask them, who is directly impacted and who should we make sure is in this conversation? Because a big part of all of this is making sure that we are curating in and making sure we're not excluding people that might have that one bit of cultural or experiential or environmental experience that could save us from the bill of something like a climate change coming from this fourth industrial revolution phase of innovation. So with that, I just there's a Design Justice Network. I want you to look into what they have to say around design principles. There's a whole field of work coming out around design well-being, particularly when it comes to technology in the brain, and then design prosperity. How are we shifting from scarcity-based mentalities to abundant mentalities so that we're not continuing to support oppressive systems based on fear of each other's, the zero-sum game idea. So there's a lot more slides here, but I won't go into them. But I urge you also to look at the Collective Wisdom Report from MIT on the power of co-creation, which also has some incredible insights on how to democratize the imagination of our future. So I thank you so much for this time, and I would love to open it up for any questions or concerns or comments, welcome to have them come out through the chat. Or if you want to come on off of mute and share any ideas or something that resonated, something that you would like to challenge, I would love to have that conversation. I'm scrolling up in the chat to see if there's anything. Nobody.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the questions that you presented are great, and I can totally see myself bringing those to the forefront of our conversations in MESA. But is there some film or short film that I could show them to kind of explain this bring it down to their level? What does it mean for a 15-year-old to understand diversity and equity and how it's going to impact their future? Is there a film by a adolescent in that age group or something?
I think that's a great question there. I mean, some of the questions that, well, I mean, I am actually working on, we got some seed funding from the Ford Foundation, and we're in conversations with a streaming company right now to create a series. It's not, it's a couple of years away from being released, unfortunately, but trying to the purpose of the series is to expose communities in a family environment, in the television, you know, how media comes into the family environment, to say, okay, these are the pipeline technologies and scientific breakthroughs that we're seeing, yeah, kind of lift the veil on that. And then, but putting it in a way that invites them to have a conversation around, well, how would I want to engage with this? I did an exercise with some young college age students about a year and a half ago. And I would explain, you know, just you can read an article, find articles that explain a new technology that's coming out or a new scientific breakthrough around these, you know, major areas like IoT and AI, and just explain, okay, make sure they understand what the technology is, and then ask them, you know, how would you want to see that manifest in your life? And, you know, let's think 30 years into the future. What does that look like in your life? And one of the, I explained to one of the students this idea of augmented reality and kind of social AI, conversational AI, and how you can be in conversation with a hologram. And I explained that as a possibility. And he got really excited about that. He goes, oh, well, I said, what kind of conversational hologram of yourself would you want to leave, you know, if you were dead, like, what would you want to leave in that way? And he said, I would like to have a hologram. And this is a Black man, 19 years old, that was studying interactive technology in school. And he didn't even know this existed yet. So he was pure in the fantasy world of like, if this ever existed. And he said, if this existed, I would want to have a version of myself that would show up at bus stops when people are sitting and waiting for their bus. And I would just want to turn to them and say, how are you doing? How are you doing today? And I was just like, I mean, of all the things, I wouldn't have thought that would have been how he would want to leave a legacy of himself, using this technology of engaging people in a way that tried to have them do self-reflection on their inner life. So I know there's a lot of, so that's one thing that hopefully will come out in a couple of years. Other than that, I would say a lot of the documentary world is, I mean, Explained is something that I do with my children. I don't know if you've seen that on Netflix. I've also engaged with, you know, there's another series, I can't remember the name right now, about the future of bioengineering that's on Netflix that can expose, I think does a good job of exposing some of the ethical dilemmas around it. It is featuring only men and only predominantly white men, so it's complicated in that. The Social Dilemma film, I think you guys have probably all heard about that this year. And then The Great Hack. And then, of course, Coded Bias is one that I think exposes some of the challenges around, you know, algorithmic oppression, algorithmic injustice. The only thing is that I think what's important is not just to frame these technologies as what the kind of Black Mirror dystopian applications might look like, but also to say, as a neutral thing, this is a capacity, this is a capability that human beings have. and engage them in how they would want to see it utilized in a just and equitable lens. And I think that's the piece of it that we've been doing something called a Futurist Writers Room, and we're actually running a Futurist Writers Room with the support of the Omidyar Network in 2021, where we're inviting the class of 2020 and the class of 2008 to co-create a vision of their futures, because they've both been in positions of navigating really, trying to chart a path in a time of great uncertainty. And I was going to go through, if I had more time, some of the pedagogy around that. But we basically have been using virtual whiteboards to have, just on a few prompts, having the youth not only kind of look at an aspirational future through the lens of, what is the state that you want that future to look like? What are the, what is the kind of the actions to get there? And what are some of the artifacts from that future? What are some of the people, like, can you imagine yourself or another character in that future? And that's been really incredible. We've done 648 hours of these Futurist Writers Rooms this year with a multi-generational, group of people. And the point that I'm trying to make is that having an aspirational kind of world building approach with youth allows them to feel very empowered of having a sense of their agency in that future. Also some incredible ideas. This particularly was looking at how do we come out of a pandemic into a new normal and not going back to old normals that are problematic. There's some incredible ideas that came out of the work that we've done with this multi-generational community over this year. And another part of it is we also asked them to go back into the past and to identify a place in our history where we could have made a different decision. And what they did was they made alternate histories. If we had made this different decision at this time, like let's say we adopted solar technology for energy instead of fossil fuel technology. Solar technology was around 10 years before fossil fuel technology. Why did we choose solar? Why didn't we choose green energy then? Why did we choose fossil fuel based energy then? And they have to analyze, like, what was the thinking, putting themselves in the shoes of those that had the power to do that. And what that does is we found that it gives people a sense of understanding the responsibility and power they have in this moment by going, okay, this small group of people made this one decision, and look at the impact of that over the last 50, 60, 100 years. Then when they come to the work of imagining their aspirational future, they go, that's the power I have right now. And this exercise is one that helps me to be very thoughtful and intentional about how I want to wield that power and how we as a collective want to wield that power. So I wish I can share some resources with MESA that I'm aware of, but to be quite transparent, I'm not working in the K through 12 field personally, so I don't have them at that level right now. Any other thoughts?
I had one. My name is Mark Claus. I'm from Arizona. I work with the University of Arizona Early Academic Outreach and also with Manny and a couple little things with MESA in the Phoenix area at times. But how do you see the evolution of engineering education? I'm a PhD student as well, and I'm looking at curriculum change in the engineering education at the higher education institutions, not at K through 12. I'm looking, how do we implement like indigenous education curriculum? Mm-hmm. What do you feel about that in higher education institutions and how to develop that type of curriculum?
So I'm a big fan of the Indigenous Futures program in Concordia College in Canada. Skawanati is a member of the Guild, was the founder of this program, and they're doing incredible work around working with youth and not only training them in, engineering code, and they're actually even came out of this idea of creating their own code from scratch based on indigenous lost languages, which is like, whoa, blow your mind. But one of the things that I think I was really struck by, I'm just giving a sense, I went to this event at MIT a couple of years ago called Collective Wisdom, based on the Co-Creation Studios report on collective wisdom. And the Indigenous Futures, a group of folks from that organization came down and participated. And we had an AI neurologist on a panel talking about really giving us all existential crisis around the capabilities of AI at this time. And we were all, you know, we were having these like, oh, freak out moments. And then we broke out into groups. And I happened to go into a group with all indigenous coders and AI engineers that were young. They were all in their 20s. And they laughed at me because I was talking about my existential crisis about, you know, what's real, what's not real, you know. And they said, it's so funny to listen to non-indigenous people freak out about sentient AI, the possibilities of sentient AI. They said in our culture, we have always had a relationship with sentient systems that are non-human. So this is, I mean, just that perspective alone of coming from a perspective that doesn't make humans the hierarchy and kind of balances out with other living creatures and beings on this planet was a huge shift. And when I think about, you know, how are those conversations? I mean, these were computer engineers in their 20s, indigenous. Just having them come from that cosmology, that value system, and being in the room educated everybody else. So it's like almost like, how are you just creating that space? The other thing I would say about that is I spoke with Pascal Fung, who's a professor at University of Hong Kong when I was at the World Economic Forum. She's one of the top AI engineers in the country of China. And she said that one of her biggest challenges, she said, my students are so in the weeds of trying to get a technology to work, to try to get code to work, that it's not even fair of me to ask them to come back up to the 30,000 foot level and understand the implication. Like, she didn't say it's not fair. She was just like, it's so hard when you're just trying to get something to work on that nitty gritty level to understand implications and equity and inclusion and belonging and all of these kind of social constructs. And so she said, I need them to be in collaboration with people that are deep in the weeds of that work. So, and they're deep in the weeds of their engineering work, and have them to have conversation so that they can balance out each other's hyper specialization, so that they miss each other's opportunities. So I don't know the full answer to that, obviously, but there's something in terms of, and that's what I was doing with Stanford. They were really interested in how do we not force STEM students to understand sociology or whatever, like having to have the same level of expertise, but how do we just make sure that we're keeping an open dialogue and exposure and building language across those disciplines so that they can check and balance each other as we wield these technologies, particularly on making sure we have the diversity of thought, you know?
Kamal, thank you so much for this last hour. I think back to the last time I had an opportunity to hear you speak. I've watched some talks online as well, and each time I feel like I come away with something new and kind of that gets me thinking and wondering. And I think that we see that from many of the participants that were involved and engaged in today's presentation. So thank you so much. If it's okay, what I may do is follow up with you. I'll go through the chat and kind of see what questions might be there. And then I'll follow up with you and see if there's questions that we can kind of send out. And if you've got thoughts on those, we'd love to be able to send out some of those responses to the group. These questions, just that you presented towards the end of your presentation, give us great ideas of how I think middle school and high school educators can start to have conversations with youth around equity, and then also challenge those of us in higher education also to continue to think about how do we keep that going throughout, because that the future that you're kind of pointing to, that possibility is a great one. And so just wanted to say thank you very much for all of your time. We greatly appreciate it. And at this point in time, please everybody kind of express your thanks to Kamal for all that she has shared. We'll definitely be in contact to kind of get your thoughts on some of these other questions. And at this point in time, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Anita, who's gonna kind of leave us with some final thoughts in regards to our our conference. Maybe I'll give you a final farewell there, Kamal.
Thank you so much, everyone. Honored to be here. Thank you, Rudy, and thank you, David, and thank you, Mesa. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Again, just to echo that, thank you so much. We are honored and privileged to have Kamal with us. So thank you. A great kickoff to our conference today. Just some additional final housekeeping stuff as we get forward. I did put in the chat, and I'll replace it as it has scrolling up. One is to make sure and if everybody can complete their attendance and survey. This is helping us to track attendance for all of our sessions for any data that we need. So it's twofold. So please, everybody, if they can complete that attendance and survey link. Secondly, I forgot to mention this earlier, but we do have a conference Padlet that we are keeping as a parking lot of ideas and as a parking lot of thought for the duration of this conference. It'll be shared now in the opening ceremony, and I will repost this after I talk. I just can't talk and post it at the same time. But so make sure to complete your survey. If you can just open up that Padlet, keep it handy on your desktop that, as thoughts come up through the session, please feel free to add little sticky notes, throughout. This is just kind of our collective for just general questions and thoughts for our conference. Secondly, I had a few questions about, will this be recorded? What will happen after the conference? So about a week, well, we'll give out notifications after the conference, but we will be in contact with you. About a week after the conference, our final resource page will be up where we will have recordings of all of our sessions, documentation, answers to these questions, PowerPoints, etc. Just resources for you as teachers to use, after the conference. So that will be available for everyone. Also, I do understand that there's lots of sessions that are of interest, even for myself. I'll be leading one, so I can't be in all of them, but you may want to go back and check out other sessions that you may have missed. So with that, the next session, session 1, you have your option of 6 rooms, Exploring Equity with the World Cafe, Design Thinking in the Virtual Environment, Microaggressions, Building Equity with Mentorship, the School Share Out Room, and also Introduction to Prototyping with the Microbit. They did put the links to the next meetings in the chat. The rooms will open, the session started at 11:45, so there is a break, so that's there. But before leaving, again, make sure to complete your attendance link. And then I will also put up the link to the Padlet. And I will stay on the meeting for a couple more minutes in case anybody has any questions, and also to make sure that the links remain active if you need to take a few minutes to get everything opened. So I just reposted the attendance link. The attendance link is the SurveyMonkey link, and then the Padlet is padlet.com is the link for the conference. Okay, so with that, I will go ahead and stop the recording now and enjoy your next sessions. Thank you.